A knock on the door startled Grandma Lydia. Her heart skipped a beat as she stood from her armchair and walked quietly to the door. When she opened the door, two young men stood before her, their polished shoes glinting in the light. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The man in the gray suit stepped forward, adjusting his tie. "I am Property Agent Thompson, and this house is under my care," he said briskly. He gestured to the other man standing beside him. "This is my client. He's interested in purchasing the property. Could you step aside so we can survey the house?" Lydia's brows knitted in confusion. "You must have the wrong address. This is my house. My son bought it from me." Agent Thompson's expression remained unyielding. "I'm quite certain this is the correct address. This property was handed to me last week." He began rummaging through his briefcase, finally pulling out a document. Holding it up, he added, "Here, take a look." With shaky hands, Grandma Lydia took the paper. Her eyes widened as she recognized her late son's name, Oliver, written on the document. Her voice cracked as she said, This is my son's name. He gave me this house for my 68th birthday." Thompson's face showed no hint of sympathy. "I don't know about that," he replied coldly. "But I can assure you, the person who handed me this house wants it sold quickly." He pulled another paper from his briefcase and handed it to her. Grandma's hands trembled as she unfolded the eviction notice. Her breath hitched when she read the words, 4 weeks to vacate the property. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she grabbed the doorframe for support. "Please," she pleaded softly, "let's go inside and talk about this." The client, a tall man with an impatient air, glanced at his watch and muttered, "I don't have all day. Let's just look around and get this over with." Before Grandma Lydia could stop them, they brushed past her into the house. Agent Thompson led the way into the house, pointing out its features with a professional air. "This is the living room," he said, gesturing to the cozy space filled with Grandma Lydia's family photos and treasured keepsakes. The client's gaze swept the room, his expression indifferent as he jotted down notes. They moved briskly through the kitchen, where Thompson opened cabinets and gestured to the counters. "Plenty of storage space," he remarked. The client nodded curtly, inspecting the room with a quick glance. Finally, they entered Lydia's bedroom. Her chest tightened as they stepped into her most private space. They even peeked into the small adjoining bathroom, flipping the light on briefly before moving on. The old black lady sat stiffly on the couch, her heart heavy as she watched them treat her cherished home like a mere property listing. Just 3 months ago, Grandma's only son Oliver had died. She was still deep in mourning, her heart weighed down by the loss of the one person who had always cared for her. He had provided for her, and now even the house he gave her was under threat. But who could be so cruel? Grandma pondered, her mind racing for answers. She briefly thought of Oliver's wife, Josephine, but quickly brushed off the idea. She had always been kind to her daughter-in-law, never expecting such betrayal. Perhaps it was one of Oliver's friends, someone who had access to his documents and was now trying to sell the house. She resolved to wait patiently. Maybe once the property agent finished his survey, he would reveal the person behind this heartless scheme. When the survey was finally done, the potential buyer left, and Agent Thompson sat down with Grandma. Her eyes pleaded for the truth as she asked, "Who gave you this property to sell?" The agent leaned back casually. "Josephine," he said flatly. "She claimed the property belonged to her late husband. I'm just doing my job. If you have any issues, sort them out with her before the 4 weeks are up." He stood, adjusted his suit, and added with a faint smile, "Have a nice day, Ma." Without waiting for a reply, he walked out the door. Grandma Lydia sat motionless, stunned by the revelation. She couldn't believe Josephine could do something so cruel. Memories of her son's complaints about his wife flooded back. He had often confided in her, frustrated by Josephine's selfishness. Lydia had always begged him to be patient, even when he wanted to divorce her a year ago. Now the painful truth hit her: Oliver had been right all along. She picked up her phone and dialed Josephine's number, her hands trembling. The call went unanswered. She tried again and again, but Josephine refused to pick up. As the evening set in, Grandma made a decision. Tomorrow, she would travel to confront Josephine and see her 2 grandchildren. She needed answers, and she wouldn't rest until she had them. Grandma was overwhelmed with confusion. If Josephine had the official documents for the house, how could she possibly prove that it was gifted to her? She recalled Oliver's words about Josephine, how he'd warned her that Josephine was extraordinarily greedy and would stop at nothing for money. She didn't know much about legal matters, but her gut told her that in court, documents would carry more weight than her word. After all, Josephine was Oliver's wife, and the property still bore his name. How could she prove otherwise? Grandma mulled over how to approach Josephine. Should she beg? Or would it be better to confront her with threats? The uncertainty gnawed at her. A terrifying thought crept in. What if Josephine succeeded and she was evicted? Where would she go? She had no savings to afford a decent place, and she couldn't bear the thought of leaving the home she'd come to love so deeply. This house wasn't just a building to Grandma, it was her sanctuary. Every corner reflected her personality and creativity. As an artist, even with her frail, trembling hands, she had painted vibrant murals on the walls of her room and living area. Outside, the garden was her pride, each flower carefully chosen and lovingly nurtured for 3 years since her son gifted her the home. Oliver originally bought the house for himself but later decided to give it to her. He had promised to handle the paperwork and transfer the ownership, but he never got around to it. Lydia hadn't pressed him, never imagining he would pass away so soon. She had always believed she would go first, leaving the house to return to him. But death, she realized, struck without age or reason. That night, Grandma couldn't sleep. By 8 p.m., she was usually fast asleep, but not this time. She lay in bed, her thoughts racing endlessly. Memories of Oliver flooded her mind. His first cry as a baby, his childhood laughter, and finally, the moment she saw his lifeless body. The emotions became too much to bear. Her frail, innocent heart cracked under the weight of grief and fear, and she cried into her pillow, soaking it with tears. The next morning, she arrived in California and made her way to Josephine's home. To her disappointment, Josephine wasn't there. Instead, she was greeted by her 2 grandchildren, Anna, 6 years old, and Micah, 4. Micah was lying on the bed, pale and frail. He was clearly unwell. When Grandma saw the children, her heart broke. Tears welled in her eyes as she noticed how tattered their clothes were and how neglected they looked. "We're hungry, Grandma," Anna said softly. "Didn't your mother give you food before she left?" Grandma asked, alarmed. "She did," Anna replied, leading her to the refrigerator. Inside, there were cookies and soda drinks piled haphazardly. "Is this what you call food in this house?" Grandma exclaimed, her voice trembling with frustration. She remembered Oliver often complaining about how Josephine was too lazy to prepare proper meals for the kids, resorting instead to sugary snacks and junk food. Anna confessed they were tired of eating sweets, candies, and cookies every day. Grandma's heart ached for them. Despite being weary from her long journey, she didn't sit down to rest. She went straight to the grocery store, buying fresh vegetables and other food items. She returned and cooked a proper meal for them. Anna ate eagerly, but Micah couldn't manage more than a few bites. Grandma tried to feed him, but he struggled to swallow. Her worry deepened. This was serious. Now, Grandma not only had to worry about losing her house but also about the well-being of her grandchildren. The neglect was too much to bear. What if she lost them too? They were the only living connection she had to her late son. She considered taking the children to live with her. But the thought of how Josephine might react held her back. What if she refused? Grandma sighed, fear and uncertainty weighing heavy on her tired heart. After much effort, Grandma managed to get Micah to eat a little food. Concerned about his health, she decided to take him to the hospital. Just as she prepared to leave, the door opened, and Josephine walked in. Josephine didn't greet Grandma. Instead, she strode over, grabbed Micah from her hands, and set him down on the couch. Then she turned, her expression cold and dismissive. "What are you doing in my house?" "I called you several times yesterday, and you didn't answer," Grandma replied, her voice steady despite the tension. "I didn't have the time to answer your calls," Josephine shot back. "But why are you here? You have no right to come into my house without my permission." Grandma could sense this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. Still, she wasn't afraid. She suspected Josephine's boldness came from guilt. You gave a property agent the documents for my house and told him to sell it. You, with no shame, served me an eviction notice for my house. The house my son bought for me. Josephine's face hardened. That house is not yours. It belonged to my husband, and now it belongs to me. So, pack your things and move out. I've already asked the court to handle this with no mercy. You know the truth, Grandma retorted, her voice quivering with emotion. My son gave me that house 3 years ago, and you even congratulated me at the time. How can you now say it isn't mine? Josephine smirked with arrogance. I need money, and since the house is now legally mine, I'm selling it. It's not easy taking care of 2 kids. It's nothing personal, it's just economics. Grandma stared at her in disbelief. You talk about taking care of them? She pointed toward Anna and Micah. You don't even feed them properly. When was the last time you cooked them a decent meal? Josephine crossed her arms. I feed them all the time. I keep the fridge stocked. Look for yourself. Grandma's frustration boiled over. You call cookies and soda food? That's what you give them to eat. Hold it, old lady, Josephine snapped, stepping closer to Grandma with a menacing glare. They are my kids. I gave birth to them, not you. What I feed them is none of your business. Grandma's nose caught a whiff of alcohol on Josephine's breath. You left these kids hungry to go drink alcohol this early in the day? And you dare call yourself a mother? Josephine's eyes flared with anger, and she raised her hand threateningly. You keep talking to me like that, and I'll make you regret it, old black lady. Watch your mouth. Grandma stepped back, her heart pounding. She knew she had to tread carefully. She didn't have the strength to defend herself if Josephine turned violent. After a tense silence, Josephine dropped her hand and returned to her seat. I have the papers, and you have nothing, Josephine declared smugly. I will sell that house, and if you try to fight me, bring it on. I have expert lawyers who'll crush you in court. Just then, Josephine's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she grabbed her handbag and hurried to the door. Before leaving, she turned to Grandma and said coldly, for weeks. You have 4 weeks to get out of my house. Then she slammed the door and left. The weight of Grandma Lydia's predicament bore down heavily on her. She had no place to go if she were evicted, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. But before her thoughts could spiral into endless worry, she turned and saw Micah lying weakly on the sofa. Her concern for him snapped her out of her despair. She took the little boy to the hospital, where the doctor examined him and ordered some tests. The results, the doctor explained, would take some time. In the meantime, he prescribed medications to help Micah recover. Grandma returned home with the boy, but her restlessness persisted. Unable to sit idly, she decided to seek legal advice. She remembered the son of an old friend who had become a lawyer. She called her friend, got his number, and arranged to meet him. At the lawyer's office, Grandma laid out her situation. The young lawyer listened intently, concern evident in his expression. Josephine has a strong case, he said after a pause. She has all the documents for the house, and as Oliver's wife, the law is likely to favor her. With a voice full of desperation, Grandma asked, "But what can I do? Is there no hope for me against my daughter-in-law?" The lawyer's tone was thoughtful. "The best chance you have is your son's will. If he left a will that specifically names you as the rightful owner of the house, that would strengthen your case significantly." Grandma's face fell. "Since he passed, we've been waiting for someone to bring up his will, but no one has. I don't even know if he made one." The lawyer leaned forward. "You need to find out if your son had a lawyer or any legal representative. His closest friends might know something. Without a will, it will be difficult to fight Josephine in court. She is his legal wife and the mother of his 2 children. Grandma nodded, a glimmer of determination flickering in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. As she left the office, walking slowly down the corridor, a name suddenly came to her mind, Lucas. Lucas had been Oliver's closest friend. If anyone knew about a will, it would be him. She visited Lucas in his office. He was genuinely happy to see her, but immediately grew concerned as she explained her ordeal. "This shouldn't be happening to you," Lucas said, shaking his head in disbelief. You poured your life into ensuring Oliver succeeded. You deserve far more than that house. You did more than any mother could for her son. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I know his lawyer, but I haven't seen or heard from him in a long time, even before Oliver passed away. Don't worry. I'll find him and get back to you. Grateful for his support, Grandma thanked Lucas and left his office. She intended to return home, but with Micah still unwell and awaiting his test results, she stayed nearby. Staying in the same house as Josephine was unthinkable, even with a guest room available. So, she booked a modest hotel room for the night. The next day, Grandma took Micah back to the hospital. Josephine didn't acknowledge her, nor did she attempt to stop her from leaving. Instead, she cast a scornful, hostile glance as Grandma and Micah walked out of the house. At the hospital, the doctor called Grandma into his office to discuss Micah's test results. The doctor's tone was grave. Micah has developed fatty liver disease and is also insulin resistant, he explained. Grandma's heart sank as the doctor continued, this is a serious condition, deadly if left unchecked, but it's entirely preventable. He's been consuming far too many processed carbs and sugary foods. This can lead to complications like heart disease, diabetes, and other severe health issues. The doctor handed her a dietary plan. From now on, no sugar or processed carbs. He needs a balanced diet with plenty of vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains. Grandma nodded, her resolve strengthening. I'll make sure he gets the right food, she promised. She looked at Micah, who sat quietly by her side, and silently vowed to protect him, no matter the obstacles. Grandma would have started the treatment, but she had no money. So, she returned to Josephine's house and explained Micah's diagnosis with urgency. This is a life-threatening disease, she pleaded. He's your child. Look after him properly. But Josephine barely reacted. Her indifference sparked Grandma's anger. You're his mother. How can you ignore this? She demanded, her voice trembling with frustration. Anna, sensing the seriousness of her brother's condition, tugged at her mother's arm, tears streaming down her face. Mom, please take Micah back to the hospital. He needs help, she cried. After much delay and with visible annoyance, Josephine finally returned Micah to the hospital, where he was admitted to start the necessary treatment. Feeling drained and powerless, Grandma left and returned to her home. Her mind raced, uncertain if her visit had been helpful or futile. Now, all she could do was wait for Lucas to locate the lawyer and pray her late son's will existed, and favored her. The next day, Grandma's anxiety deepened when Thompson, the property agent, arrived at her house with another potential buyer. The buyer surveyed the property and expressed satisfaction, agreeing to purchase it. Later, Thompson informed Grandma about the development. You need to prepare to vacate the house soon, he said bluntly. Each passing day weighed heavily on Grandma as she felt the walls closing in on her. On the fourth day after her return, Lucas finally called. His voice held both relief and concern. I've located Oliver's lawyer, he said. But there's a complication. He's in the hospital, unconscious, due to a car accident. Grandma's heart sank. What does this mean for the will? Can we get it now? I spoke to his wife, Lucas explained. She confirmed that her husband does have Oliver's will, but until he recovers, we can't access it. The doctors say he's responding well to treatment and is likely to pull through. The news gave Grandma a small glimmer of hope. At least there was confirmation of the will's existence. Yet, uncertainty lingered. She had no idea what was written in the will, and not knowing left her worried and restless. With each passing day, she clung to the possibility that justice might be on her side, while the threat of eviction loomed ever closer. Later that day, Grandma tried calling Josephine to inquire about Micah's condition, but Josephine didn't pick up the phone. It wasn't until later that Anna saw the missed calls on her mother's phone and called Grandma back. The little girl told her, Micah is getting better. He can go outside now. Relieved but still anxious, Grandma held on to the hope that Micah would be well again. 2 weeks before the eviction deadline, Grandma received a call from Lucas. The lawyer has regained consciousness and can talk now, he said urgently. Without hesitation, Grandma traveled to meet the lawyer. Though it was unusual for the lawyer to engage in serious discussions because of his medical conditions, his wife, who had been briefed by Lucas on Grandma's situation, felt sympathy for the old woman and allowed her to see him. The lawyer, still in pain, struggled to speak. His words came out slowly, one after the other. "My wife told me about your situation. Your son did leave a will, and you are included generously in it. But I'm not sure about the house. It may or may not be part of the will." He paused, wincing as he took a deep breath. His wife gently supported his head and gave him some water, which he sipped slowly. "Please, listen carefully," he continued, his voice weak. "The will is not with me, but I know where it is. I pray Josephine hasn't found it. I can't remember the exact details, but I know that the will doesn't favor her much. She will be furious when she sees it, and I'm certain she will destroy it if she finds it. It's in your son's house. It's in the inner pocket of the safe." Grandma's heart raced. "I know the safe," she replied. "That's where Oliver kept his valuables. And I know the combination." The lawyer continued, "The safe has a concealed inner pocket. When you lift the base cover, you'll find it there. I hope Josephine hasn't discovered this." A nurse entered the room, urging the lawyer to take his medications and rest. Grandma stood up, thanking the lawyer for his help. She walked with his wife to the door. "I wish you luck," the wife said, her eyes filled with concern. "Please be careful when you go into the house. My husband warned me about Josephine." "I will," Grandma promised. "Thank you so much for everything. If there's anything else you need, don't hesitate to call me," she said warmly. With that, Grandma left the hospital, determined to find the will and protect her home, but fully aware of the dangerous path she was about to tread. Grandma called a taxi and left, her heart pounding with fear at what might happen if Josephine noticed her actions. The weight of the situation was unbearable, but she had to move forward. When she arrived, Micah eagerly opened the door, shouting to his sister, "Anna, guess who's back?" Before Anna could answer, he shouted again, "Grandma," as he jumped into her frail arms. Grandma held him tightly, but then asked, her voice sharp with urgency, "Is your mother at home?" "No, she's always not at home," Micah answered, not understanding the gravity of the question. Anna came running and greeted her warmly as Grandma stepped inside. Without wasting a moment, Grandma headed straight to her late son's room and found the safe. Her hands trembled as she prayed the combination would still work. She entered the code, and with a satisfying click, the safe opened. She lifted the brown lining inside the safe, revealing the concealed inner pocket. There, tucked away, was the will, sealed in a plastic envelope. For a moment, Grandma's curiosity urged her to open it, but fear of tampering with its authenticity held her back. Instead, she carefully slipped it into her bag and turned to the children. "Grandma needs you to do something for me," she said, her voice serious. "Will you promise not to tell your mommy that I opened the safe?" "Yes," they both chorused eagerly. But Anna, always full of energy, shook her waist and danced a little, stretching out her answer in a playful way. Grandma smiled and went to the living room, surveying the house. It was clear that Josephine hadn't changed. She hadn't cooked any food for the kids. Instead, she'd bought fast food, more processed carbs for them to eat. Grandma walked into the kitchen and began cooking a fresh meal for the children. As she worked, Anna asked her, "Grandma, can you teach me how to cook so I can make food for myself and Micah?" The children's complaints poured out. "We're tired of eating this packaged food," Anna added. Micah nodded in agreement. Anna continued, "When Dad was alive, he was the one who cooked for us." Grandma's heart tightened. She knew the children were longing for stability and care. Then, Micah spoke again, his voice soft but firm. "When you go back, we want to come with you." Anna nodded too. "We don't want to stay with Mommy anymore. She comes home late every night, smelling funny, and talks about things we don't understand." Grandma's heart sank. She knew they were referring to their mother returning home drunk. Fearing that Josephine might come back and something bad might happen, she quickly promised to return for them and hurried out of the house. Though her heart ached for the children, Grandma knew the road ahead was fraught with danger. She had to protect them, but her own safety and the uncertain outcome of the will weighed heavily on her mind. Grandma took the will and went straight to the hospital, where the lawyer's wife was keeping vigil beside him as he slept. She handed her the will and left. Over the next few days, the lawyer's condition improved greatly, and he was soon discharged from the hospital. Although weak, he knew how much Oliver had loved his mother, and with the little strength he had left, he began processing the will. Meanwhile, Grandma stayed at home, consumed by thoughts of the will. There was no guarantee that the house would be left to her, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. She prepared herself for whatever fate awaited her, even beginning to pack up her belongings just in case she had to move. She confided in some of her friends, who offered their support and promised to pray for her. Then, one morning, she received a message from the lawyer. He had scheduled the date to read the will, and she was requested to be present. The day arrived, and Grandma traveled to Josephine's house, where the will was to be read. A few people had gathered, including Lucas, and Josephine was already there, exuding confidence. She believed that, as the wife, everything would be willed to her, especially with the 2 kids. When Grandma arrived, Josephine greeted her coldly, saying, "You won't get a dime of me and my kids' money." Grandma didn't respond, sitting quietly as the lawyer began reading the will. The first part concerned Josephine. Oliver had left her a small fraction of his wealth, less than 10%. Next, the lawyer moved to Grandma's portion. He had willed the house to her, explicitly stating that no one else was to claim it. Grandma placed a hand over her chest, breathing a sigh of relief. Josephine's face turned red with anger. "This can't be happening," she shouted. "I am his wife. We were legally married until his death." The others in the room calmed her down, while the lawyer, who had been seated at the front, continued reading. Then came the portion for the children. Oliver had willed all of his properties, including the house they were living in, to Anna and Micah. He had also entrusted his mother with their care, including the management of the properties, until they grew up. The lawyer read on, saying that after Oliver's death, the children were to live with their grandmother, not Josephine. He had backed this up with numerous pieces of evidence, showing that he didn't trust Josephine to properly care for the kids. Josephine's face contorted with rage as she vowed to challenge the will in court. In the days that followed, she did just that. But despite her efforts, nothing changed. Oliver had provided ample evidence of her substance abuse and neglect, and even when the kids were summoned to testify in court, they supported their father's claims. Defeated, Josephine packed her things and disappeared, leaving behind the children. Anna and Micah, relieved and happy, moved in with Grandma, who now had full custody of her grandchildren and the home that was rightfully hers. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to support the channel. Your help means so much.